podcast, I normally speak with payer and provider executives and with entrepreneurs. This episode will be a little bit different. Ultimately, we are all consumers of healthcare, like it or not, and the innovation that we showcase was meant to help make the experience of healthcare better and more efficient. So today I'm going to speak with someone who I very much admire and love about her experience with the US healthcare system, and that is my grandmother, Sydell Aaron. Mima Sydell was born in 1932. Here are a few stats to give you some perspective about how medicine has changed since then. In 1929, 3 years before Mima was born, the first polio patient was saved. In the 1940s, when Mima was a teenager, scientists succeeded in isolating penicillin, and antibiotics became widely available for the first time. Before that, you could die from a simple infection. The first kidney transplant was done in 1952 when Mima was 20 years old. In 1964, for the first time, human blood was successfully stored. Mima was 32 years old with 3 children. Mima, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I remember when I was younger, you used to tell me things like, put on a coat or you'll catch a cold, things that your mother had told you. What's your memory of how adults looked at health and healthcare when you were growing up in the 1940s and 1950s?
Well, to begin with, the doctor knew all, and you never argued or questioned the doctor. Also, when I was a child, the doctor used to come and make house calls. He would come right into the apartment and right up to the bed, sit on the bed to examine the patients. That obviously has changed tremendously. In addition to being in touch with the doctors on that level, he would take whatever time it needed to discuss with you whatever the issue was. He answered questions. He accepted coffee or tea from my mother. It was a personal relationship. He knew my parents, my sister, my relatives, and you trusted the doctor implicitly. You would never think of questioning what he suggested or expected you to do.
What was your first memory of a serious illness in the family? I know Aunt Rhoda, your sister, had polio when you were growing up.
Yes, but she was 4 years older than I. She had it when she was probably 3 or 4, and I really don't remember her illness. But I do remember I had something called rheumatic fever, and I was assigned to my bed for months. I remember my father carrying me in the elevator of a medical building to have a blood test periodically. And I was told that I have to rest, I have to eat, and eventually I'll get better. And fortunately, I did.
How long were you sick for? Do you remember?
Several months.
Wow. No school, nothing.
No, but I was young. Maybe I was 5 or 6, so it didn't make too much of an impact on my schooling.
And how old were you when the doctor stopped coming to the house? Do you remember when that transition happened?
It was quite a while after that. It was probably sometime during the period when I started having my own children, which would have been 1958, maybe a little before then.
What do you remember of healthcare in the 60s and 70s when you were raising young children?
Terror.
Not the children, the healthcare system.
No, my terror, because there were so many things to watch and to think about. And the public really wasn't very much aware. Whatever books on medical and medicine and diseases were printed for medical people, not for the layman. And so when they told us, gave us the names of germs and viruses that we should watch out for, we could hardly pronounce them, let alone understand what they were. Medicine per se was a mystical wonder, because you had a child on penicillin for 10 days, no more, and wow, they were cured, except my children. My son had ear infections, and he ran a very high temperature with each ear infection. So when I took him to the doctor, even though he had temperature, and my mother said, don't take a child out when they have temperature. But how was I going to get him to the doctor? So I bundled him up. We walked he was in his carriage. I pushed him. We walked 5 or 6 blocks to the doctor. And the doctor examined him and said, oh, he has a very bad ear infection. Put him on this medication for 10 days. Fine. I took him home. We gave him fluids, juice, whatever he wanted to drink. And eventually his temperature went down. And on the 10th day, he was normal. And on the 11th day, he had 104 again. And this went on for quite a while. And I said, what is the end of this? Where does this go? And I never got a definitive answer. Well, it just takes time. And then there was also a controversy about how much antibiotics children should be having. So what do? Let your child run a temperature of 103 or 4 and worry about other effects of the antibiotic, or give it to them with the hopes that they will recover? So there was a lot of unknown, and doctors were not so upfront with a lot of things that they could have been at the time.
It was a different way of practicing medicine.
Exactly.
And I wonder too, you didn't have ChatGPT, you didn't have the internet, there was nowhere to look to get a sense of what these conditions were or what they meant. So you really just had to take the word of the person in front of you, unless you were going to read your own medical books.
Which I couldn't do, most people couldn't do. So you spoke to other mothers, or your own mother. And we went on past history and hoped that the doctor was right in your particular case. And if you're interested, my particular case was my son had that series of ear infections, mastoid.
Okay, mastoid.
They were mastoid infections. And my generation of children had horrendous scars at the back of their ears, sometimes going down into their throat, because they had mastoid infections, which became quite serious. A lot of them lost hearing as a result of that. And that every germ or virus that you've ever heard of, you imagined your child was susceptible for. But anyway, fortunately, Cliff survived the earaches and the ear infections, but had his tonsils and adenoids removed when he was 18 months old.
Wow.
Which was quite early. But after that, he never ran such a high temperature, and thankfully he never lost his hearing. And he went from cold to cold, but nothing really life-threatening.
So your late husband, my grandpa Arnie, had a pacemaker in the early 2000s. Was that your first experience of kind of a major health issue in your immediate family?
Not really, because he had had pneumonia early on and was confined to bed until that cleared up. And of course, there was still the threat of tuberculosis in the picture. Fortunately, it did not develop into that. My father, in 1977, or prior to that, developed cancer of the bladder and of the lungs, which he subsequently passed away.
How soon between the diagnosis and his passing?
Several years. Incidentally, my sister, many years later, thankfully, also died of cancer of the lungs.
What do you remember of that experience in the early 2000s with the pacemaker?
I thought it was a wonder if it could get, not guarantee, because I know nothing is guaranteed, but if it could afford a life, a valued lifestyle for several years. And of course, it struck me personally because I wanted my father to live to see my grandchildren and for my children.
Your husband.
And my husband.
Wait, you're talking about Grandpa Arnie or someone else?
Grandpa Arnie.
Yeah.
It certainly prolonged his life. But ultimately, he had to have an aortic valve replacement. And he was fine after that. I think 3 months after he had that surgery, he was on the tennis court playing tennis.
Remarkable.
And it was a miracle.
Well, I think that's a good segue to what I wanted to ask you, which is that humans are now living longer than we've ever lived before, thanks to things like pacemakers and aortic valve replacements. And I don't know if you know this, but in 1930, which was a couple years before you were born, the average lifespan for a woman was 62 years old.
Wow.
So you are already 50% above the average life expectancy the year you were born. And of course, our bodies are not necessarily meant for that sort of longevity, and things stop working. So I know this is a very general and loaded question, but talk to me about the process of aging.
It's difficult. It's difficult physically, psychologically, emotionally. It interferes with life. I don't know how else to explain it. I mean, I never thought, when you're young, you think about, when am I going to die? How am I going to, at least how am I going to die? And I believed that I would just live and then one day I would be dead. No pain, no drama, just finished. But as I got closer to aging, and realizing that, my knees don't work so well. I can't hit the tennis ball so hard anymore. My shoulder hurts. I realized that nobody gets away with no pain. And for a while, I was upset because my body was not functioning the way I was accustomed to it. And the hardest part was going to a doctor and complaining, I have a pain here, and I have this pain, and I have this. And he'd say to me, well, it's called aging. You have to expect that. And in those days, that had to be in the 60s and 70s when I was in good shape. We were in Florida, and I played golf, tennis, ran, walked for hours. And then suddenly I couldn't do all of those things. And it was a bit depressing, but I still had other things to look forward to that didn't involve running, walking, etc., etc. So when I allowed myself to think about these things, it became a melancholy mood that I would feel. But I had a lot of good things to look forward to. My children were growing up. They were thankfully healthy and smart, of course, and becoming good people. So I was very grateful. And I had a lot to look forward to with my husband. And whatever illnesses we did get, or surgeries that we did need, we overcame. Our bodies were still strong enough to overcome the hardships.
It was interesting to hear you kind of projecting forward because I think we all think like that. We think, how long will we live? It's hard for us to imagine what life will look like as life takes its toll on us. You know, the closest example I have in my own life is when I thought about the Army. I thought about spouts of physical hardship, but I never thought about the emotional anguish of being on base 28 days at a time and having your life not be your own, right? It was just something that I couldn't conceptualize. Even if I had known it was coming, I think I wouldn't have been able to wrap my head around it. And it sounds like aging is something similar. There's nothing you could have told your younger self that would have prepared you for the inevitabilities of life's ups and downs as you get older.
Absolutely true.
I ask you this question a lot, but I always forget the answer. If you could live to 120 years old with either the mind of a 30-year-old and a body that ages with you, or the body of a 30-year-old and a mind that ages with you, which one would you choose?
I would take the mind.
Meaning you want the mind of a 30-year-old,
Yes.
even if it's trapped in a body that stops working?
Stops working completely.
No.
My mind wouldn't allow that.
As recently as 1945, most deaths occurred in the home. By the 1980s, that was down to 17%. So your sister, my Aunt Rhoda, your late husband, Grandpa Arnie, your brother-in-law, Uncle Vic, were all lucky enough to pass in their homes surrounded by their loved ones. And I'm sure you've also had many friends who've died in the hospital over the years. Do you think the U.S. healthcare system does a good job of allowing people to die with dignity in a place of their choosing?
I'm not sure. I don't think it's done as a matter of course. I think there are forms that we have to fill out when we're normal and relatively healthy and make decisions for ourselves for something that we hope will be far in the future. And that becomes difficult. For example, now I live in a senior residence, and they are very careful and meticulous about filling out forms, specifically on end of life decisions. Well, I don't feel that I'm at the end of my life yet. So when they ask me if I want to be resuscitated, I say, I don't know, but you have to make a decision now. Well, then I would say, yes, I want to be resuscitated once, because now I know that during the resuscitation, ribs can be broken, other problems can occur that are insurmountable in an aging body. So I'm in a quandary. And so these forms that I signed 7 years ago may not be relevant to me at this point because I see how fragile my body is. Having 2 falls within 3 months and surgery and broken bones, etc., etc. I'm rethinking that. Maybe I don't want to go through any of the pain and the discomfort and put my family through that drama. So I don't know if there's an answer to the question.
Maybe the design of it, right? Healthcare in general, doctors are taught to fix problems. And so some problems can't be fixed, or they're more philosophical than they are about fixing your health. It's what, it's the question that a neurosurgeon has to ask the family prior to operating, right? What level of loss of functionality is acceptable and life still worth living? And I think in those sorts of specialties where you're operating on the brain and the impact it's going to have on a young person, you're taught to have those conversations, and you're taught to think like that, because inevitably your life as a surgeon revolves around answering such questions and making not only the right surgical decision, but the right moral decision for that family, with that family. And perhaps doctors are not thinking about it the same way, right? They're used to solving problems, and sickness is a problem that can be solved. I can solve the problem of your heart stopping temporarily by delivering CPR. Is it in the design of the way we train our doctors to think that this problem lies?
Um, Probably, because where else are they getting their information? I mean, some of the doctors, believe it, I realize now, are more empathetic, and they let go of what their professors have taught them to a degree, and they let their hearts tell them what's right for this family. Not that they can make the decision, but they can help the family make the decision by saying, you have to think of the life this person lived and wants to continue living, and make a decision that way.
Have you been in a situation where a doctor, maybe during one of the course of your more serious illnesses, sat you down and said, forget the charts, forget the medications, what do you want?
Never. The only time I thought of that coming from a doctor was from that wonderful book that we all
Atul
read.
Gawande, Being
Yes.
Immortal. We're going to talk about that in a second, actually. It's interesting. So, I mean, this is kind of what we were talking about. Medicine traditionally focused on health and repairing people's health. And as a result, sickness, aging, mortality are seen as medical issues. But the people that repair our health are chosen for their scientific prowess rather than their understanding of human needs. Not to say they don't sometimes overlap, but that's not what gets you into medical school. And the irony, as we discussed, is that life is only worth living if there's a quality of life within it. But as a society, we allow practitioners of medicine to determine how we live out our final years. And
Right.
to your point, Atul Gawande is a renowned physician and geriatrician, and he wrote that book called Being Mortal. And there's a number of interesting ideas in that book. I wanted to read a couple of them so we can talk about them together. The first quote was, "We want autonomy for ourselves and safety for those we love." That remains the main problem and paradox for the frail. Many of the things that we want for those we care about are things that we would adamantly oppose for ourselves because they would infringe upon our sense of self. The second quote along the same vein is, "The terror of sickness and old age is not merely the terror of the losses one is forced to endure, but also the terror of isolation. As people become aware of the finitude of their life, they do not ask for much. They do not seek more riches. They do not seek more power. They ask only to be permitted, insofar as possible, to keep shaping the story of their life in the world, to make choices and sustain connections to others according to their own priorities."
Exactly right. And I'm living that era right now. And I tell my family, I feel like an onion. And every time somebody tells me, you can't go there, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, I feel like the skin the onion is being peeled away from me. And those skins are my independence. And I will fight till the last breath not to give it all away. And I don't think that my family can understand that because they've never really experienced. I never experienced it. There was never a time, except when I broke a bone or whatever, that my body didn't respond to me and do what I wanted it to do. So it's very hard to contemplate that you are now in the hands of other people and they will start making decisions for you. I cannot conceive of that.
When you're in doctor's appointments with one of your kids or someone else, do you feel like the doctors speak to you or to them?
Uh-uh. That's a $24,000 question. At the beginning of my progression into seeing 7 different doctors for 7 different situations, that's exactly what happened. It was the beginning of having a computer in the examination room, and the doctor would speak to my daughters, and my daughters understood exactly what they were saying most of the time, but so did I. But they never looked at me until finally I was so frustrated that I would say, please, I'm here and I have a brain and I want you to talk to me. And some of the doctors were very insulted. They had thin skins. But I said, it's afterwards I would have this discussion with my children. I know you know what the doctor's saying, and I'm glad you heard it because sometimes I don't tell you everything, I forget or whatever. But the most important thing for me to keep my head going, my brain thinking, is to know that the doctor believes that I understand what he's saying. But if he's writing into the computer or talking to my daughter, I might as well be out of the room. I think that has changed because the doctors now, some of the doctors that I see, have assistants who sit at the computer and write everything that he is saying to me or that he wants her to write down. So that's one way of getting around it. But I think the doctors have to be more aware of the patient's individual feelings.
I agree. So let's talk about then the other part of aging. And this is another quote from Atul Gawande. When people reach the latter half of adulthood, their priorities change markedly. Most reduce the amount of time and effort they spend pursuing achievements and social networks. They narrow in. Given the choice, young people prefer meeting new people to spending time with a sibling. Old people prefer the opposite. Studies find that as people grow older, they interact with fewer people and concentrate more on spending time with family and established friends. They focus on being rather than doing, and on the present more than the future. The findings raised a further question. If we shift as we age towards appreciating everyday pleasures and relationships rather than toward achieving, having, and getting, and if we find this more fulfilling, then why do we take so long to do it? Why do we wait until we're old?
Because we're busy with a job, taking care of family, children, elderly parents. And it seems your aging to you is so far off in the distance because you don't know what it is. You have no idea. As you know, I was 91 a week ago. But the day I became 91, I didn't feel any differently from the day I was 90. It's something that is almost indescribable. If you don't experience it, you can't feel it. However, what I found is as you age, so does your family, so do your friends, so does your relatives. And with that knowledge comes the realization that it's going to happen to all of us. And so all those who are left become more precious. And you can share memories. You don't care about making new memories. I mean, we've all seen more than our ancestors have seen. And there's much more to come because things change every day. So the realization that these people may leave us at any minute is more precious than reading a book on psychology or something else. I don't have to learn anything new. I just have to see the people about whom I care and who care about me. And I have to say, well, long enough to have that pleasure.
So let's talk about mortality, since we're already here. So right now, 25% of all Medicare spending is for the 5% of patients who are in the final year of their life. And most of that money goes towards care in their last couple months that is of little apparent benefit. Atul Gawande again writes, whenever I have a patient with a terminal illness, there's almost always a long tail of possibility, however thin. What's wrong with looking for it? Nothing, it seems to me, unless it means we have failed to prepare for the outcome that's vastly more probable. The trouble is that we've built our medical system and culture around the long tail. We've created a multi-trillion-dollar edifice for dispensing the medical equivalent of lottery tickets, and have only the rudiments of a system to prepare patients for the near certainty that those tickets will not win. Hope is not a plan, but hope is our plan. The fact that we may be shortening or worsening the time we have left hardly seems to register. We imagine that we can wait until the doctors tell us that there's nothing more they can do, but rarely is there nothing more that the doctors can do. For you, the conversation about whether this is right or wrong is obviously personal, as you are 92 years old. So how do you think about that conundrum?
I would like very much to know when I'm going to die. It's a crazy thought, but it goes through my head so that I could make amends to people whom I've offended. I can say whatever I feel and that I should say to those that I care about. And but I know in reality that's impossible. So I have to go through my life as it is now, sometimes stepping on everybody's toes because I don't like what they said to me or did to me, and I take offense at it. And afterwards I say, why did you do that? You wasted 20 minutes of precious time when you could have been enjoying a joke, a memory, a movie, something with somebody that cares about you, instead of yelling at them or being angry. And I think about that a lot. I try not to be oppositional, but it doesn't always work.
So let's look at that question less from the personal perspective and more from the course of care perspective. There's a lot of doctors and surgeons that listen to the podcast. Thinking about that lottery ticket analogy, when you think
Yes.
about the final year of life, what do you wish these doctors and surgeons knew? You're 92. You have lived this. You have friends, a husband, a sister who've unfortunately passed, and so you've been in those final conversations in those final months. What do you wish they knew?
It's like, what's the next greatest invention that we're going to have in this world? I don't know what I don't know. I don't know what they don't know. I just feel that if they could just be more empathetic to the patient, listen to the patient. I know they ask leading questions with the hope that they will be guided by what the patient really needs or wants, but it doesn't always work that way. If all the doctors took all the same courses and learned all the same things, it would be a wonderful world. But doctors are human beings. I mean, they live with disaster every day of their lives. So, of course, they're going to be affected. I really can't give you an intelligent answer to that because I don't think there is.
So Atul Gawande has a potential answer, which I want to read to you. We've been wrong about what our job is in medicine. We think our job is to ensure health and survival, but really it's larger than that. It's to enable well-being. And well-being is about the reason one wishes to be alive. Those reasons matter not just at the end of life or when debility comes, but all along the way. Whenever serious sickness or injury strikes and your body or mind breaks down, the vital questions are the same. What is your understanding of the situation and its potential outcomes? What are your fears and what are your hopes? What are the trade-offs you're willing to make and not willing to make? And what is the course of action that best serves this understanding? I want to ask you a few of those questions now. What are your fears and hopes?
My hopes is that I will live as long as I am physically and mentally clear. My hope is that I die a peaceful life, die a peaceful death, that I am not in pain, and that my children don't see me in pain. I would, of course, the optimum would be to close my eyes and be done. And that's what I wish for.
And what are the trade-offs you're willing to make between here and there? What are you not willing to give up, that at which point life is no longer the way you envisioned it? Where is that line for you?
I think it's if I cannot think anymore, if my mind is, if I can't remember anything or everything that I know now, I know I am losing a lot of my memory, and it's very disturbing to me. But I also know it's part of aging. Still, if I know of people who, in the later stages of life, don't recognize their own children. And the pain that causes their children stays with their children forever. I know of children who don't go to see their parents when their parents are in that stage because it's too painful for them. I cannot imagine that. As long as I can think and I can recognize my family and look at a picture and know who's in that picture, I could give up not walking and other physical things.
So you have lived thus far what I would call long and beautiful life. Your mother came to Ellis Island with only the clothes on her back. She raised you and your sister to love your family and your country, and you built a life. You put a promising career as a fencer on hold to start a family with a man who had originally been set up with your friend, who who faked an automobile accident in order to get your number. You gave birth to 3 children who gave birth to 10 children. Do I have that right? When I wrote this, it was 9 children who have thus far given birth to 6 great-grandchildren. That's the number I was missing. You have watched 3 of your grandchildren get married and have 2 more getting married this year. As you reflect on your life so far, what wisdom would you share with your descendants and their descendants who will hopefully be able to listen to this one day? What are the big lessons after 92 years walking on this earth? Just a small throwaway question.
What's important is every moment that you live it fully. Except if you're arguing with somebody. When push comes to shove, your family is the most important thing that you will ever accomplish. And respecting people, respecting your family, loving them, supporting them. These are the things that will give you pleasure and strength. Because whatever you do to keep yourself well, to keep your mind busy, you're doing so that you will not, well, for me anyway, I do not want to be a burden to my family. So the longer I can keep a clear mind and move myself around, the better it will be for my family. And for me, I can also say, while you're young, and when you can, travel as much as you can within your budget and see as much of the world and how people live and survive. It will make you very grateful for what you have. There's always somebody who's going to have more than you do, but many more people will have less than you have. So be grateful for what you have, physically, emotionally, mentally, etc. Live your life. Do good deeds. There's much to be learned.
Well, thank you, Mima. This is my favorite podcast episode ever recorded. Thank you for sharing your experience.
Thank you for allowing me to. I love you.
Love you too. Well, good. And we did it. We did the whole thing.